Okay. Jerry Loris, I'm a design tech and I'm working on the Revit implementation.
Sean Basca, Section Head of Facilities Information Systems.
Mayo Manager, working on facilities information.
Mark Bode, I'm a design tech. I'm also working on the Revit implementation effort.
Michael Saunier, from the Revit implementation group. I'm a design tech as well.
Dave Walkenar, design tech as well.
Gary Shad, design tech as well.
Brian Majoris, design manager and
Assistant chair with architectural.
In Atlanta, can y'all hear us okay?
Some better than others. Some are very faint.
Okay.
I probably should have. I was trying to type in. Ooh, that microphone down. A little bit closer.
And
I should have.
I'm usually not.
No, I'm usually not, but when I'm typing, and Todd sent me a note running between meetings. So
Okay.
I think they're just maybe lagged from another meeting.
and just for the record, we had asked permission to record this, and we'll share the recording, but we are recording this presentation.
Did y'all want to give it a minute or?
Yeah,
Okay. No problem.
I don't think we want to wait too much longer, but we'll give him, since Todd responded right away, running between meetings. He must be between meetings.
Yeah, give him another minute, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
wait much longer. He can jump in.
Did you send a note to Florida? Yep, I did. And they have not responded, so hopefully, if they were having trouble, they usually email me and say, we can't get connected. So, if Todd joined us here and we haven't heard from them, I think we'll start. So, should we just?
Yeah,
I think we can probably just get started.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all for allowing us to be here. My name's Christian Main. I'm in the room. This is Michael Massey. We're with Applied Software. And we're kind of going to go over your responses, our responses to your questions. And if y'all want to switch it to the next slide, we'll go over the agenda. We're going to go over information about Applied Software, our firm overview. We're going to do a project team introduction and the role in the project. Then we're going to go over your specific things. We're going to go over the general review, technical review, and questions and answers. I'm going to hand it over to John Aid. He is our Director of A&E Technology Group. Prior to joining us, he worked with Gensler. He was on their leadership team and responsible for implementing Revit throughout Gensler's organization, which has about 2,500 employees. John, if you want to go ahead and take it over.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, when I worked at Gensler, that was before I came to Applied Software, so that implementation took place over 10 years ago. We were around 2,500 then. I believe Gensler's over 5,000 now. So it's a large, growing global firm, and that was gave me a lot of experience in working with multiple locations and implementing Revit on a very large scale with a team of 8 people. So a little bit about Applied Software. Again, I've been with Applied Software for a little over 8 years. Before that, practiced architecture, but Applied Software was founded back in 1982 by our president, Richard Burroughs, who is a civil engineer by profession and a graduate of Georgia Tech. We've been full-service integrators in our entire history, and we have touched on many different disciplines: architectural, engineering, solutions for owners, construction firms, manufacturers, and the like. Pretty much anything that's design-based and uses digital tools for design, and even supplemental or third-party applications and tools we have represented over the years. A lot of depth of experience. Our focus is on our clients. It's on how they do their business, how they want to improve their business, and what it's going to take to help them get to a better place implementing new technologies and improving their workflows and their business outcomes. And our specializations have ranged over the years, but we have top specializations in a variety of areas, including fabrication, construction, building, and I already mentioned fabrication, and infrastructure. So if we can go on to the next slide. Go ahead. So the way we've structured our technical services team, we've done it along certain groups of specializations. We have an architecture and engineering technology group. I'm actually the director for services for that group. And again, I have a team of 8 people that cover AE and also infrastructure. We also have a construction technology group that specializes in construction technology and workflows, and they do implementations for subcontractors, construction group, and also integrations with owners. We also have a fabrication technology group, which is one of the only specialized group under Autodesk umbrella in North America. It is a specialization that is sought after by many people because it takes design information into fabrication, into construction. So we cover the full life cycle with our specializations. And then we also have a manufacturing technology group. So our history goes back a long ways, and we have worked with manufacturers. And some of the examples, some of the information we're going to present to you involves some of those manufacturing as well as academic and other clients. Next slide. So again, our focus in working with you and with our client base is to really focus on BIM deployments and consulting and really understanding, again, the business goals and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and make sure that we understand your practice so that we can better provide solutions around them. Our group of service technicians and experts come from industry. So most of us have worked for years in industry. Myself as an example, over 30 years working in the industry, 23 of those years actually working in architectural practice. So we have a lot of experience already working with these tools and implementing them with our clients. We have a variety of methodologies for providing services. One of them is providing our training pretty much anywhere. We use it through a tool, a site, a methodology called Live Lab Learning, and you can learn more about that on our website. We also have a nationwide network of partners, so we know that we can't be experts in all things, but we have partnered with many people to provide expertise to supplement our own. And we have done that with some partners in the Autodesk network as well as people in other software and hardware areas. And the next slide is really just showing kind of where we have staff throughout the country. So we do cover a lot of territory. Although we originated out of Atlanta, Georgia, we also have offices in Texas, and then we have people pretty much spread out throughout the country, both sales and technical staff. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rest of the team who's going to be presenting today, and then as they present some of the information to you, they're going to talk a little bit about themselves. So we'll start with myself. Again, I'm the director of our services team for AE Technology Group, AE being architecture and engineering, if you will, building and building design. I manage the group of technical staff that are experts in BIM implementations, which we're going to talk a little bit more about shortly. Michael Zeveld, who will also be presenting today, he has a lot of experience in architecture. He is also one of my senior project managers, and in terms of his role on the work that we would be doing for the Mayo Clinic, he would be leading a lot of the project management, but he also offers a lot of technical expertise with BIM and visualization and BIM to operations and maintenance experience, so he has a broad spectrum of abilities that feed into providing the solutions. Matt Dillon is a team leader in our our west side of our technical team. He brings many years of architectural and implementation background experience as well across multiple industries. He also is in the room. He may provide some input if we have some questions. We'll go on to the next person. We weren't sure that Matt was going to be available for the presentation, so we kind of elbowed him out of it, but he has joined the conference and is in the room with us. Mark Petrucci is the director of our construction technology group. Mark Petrucci can talk a little bit about his own background when he starts to present, but he has a wealth of experience with AutoCAD, BIM technologies, and also the workflows and the hardware around bringing designs to the field and implementing them there. Mike Massey, who's in the room, again, he'll be participating in the presentation too. He's one of our senior application specialists, which almost doesn't do him justice. He's an architect with a very broad background in both architecture and MEP, and is also now one of our lead specialists with some of our fabrication tools in the electrical field. And Michael Reuter is our customer success advocate. He's in the room with us too, and he will join the conversation if we have additional questions and answers after we finished our more formal presentation to you. And he has a wealth of experience in construction technologies and also BIM technologies. We can go on to the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about our executive sales team quickly. So Brad Kramer is our director of our AE technology sales group. He's actually an amazing individual who really knows how to connect the dots when it comes to solutions, both technology as well as services solutions. He would probably be working with Christian Main to be one of your contacts and to make sure that we're providing you with up-to-date information on what's available and what's coming down the road. Christian Main, who's in the room with you, has a wealth of experience also in the healthcare field. So we know that he's going to be able to contribute a lot to the success of our work with you, and one of the reasons why he's there on site today. Clay Smith is our Chief Operations Officer. Unfortunately, he and Richard, our President and Founder, are not available. They're actually in flight. They got caught up in the whole Delta thing that's happened this week. So they had to switch flights and were not able to participate today, but I did want you to at least have a visual and understand that their role would be to ensure customer success and satisfaction and make sure that everything is operating smoothly from applied software end to make sure that we're meeting or exceeding your expectations. One of the questions that came up in the qualifications was were any partners that we would work with to execute some of the services. So I did want to touch on the partners that we did bring to our response to the RFQ. S2A Integration is a company that we've used for some more sophisticated modeling needs. They are run by a person that is a structural engineer and I believe has an architectural background as well. And we use them when we have to have a higher degree of if you will, BIM modeling that's more sophisticated than most modeling services are able to provide because of that expertise and professional experience that they have. EDAT is somebody that we use for a lot of visualization and scan to modeling work, and we see them as an important facilitator contributing to the modeling aspect of this. And then Coast to Coast is both a modeling group that we use, but they are, more importantly, they are a survey contractor. So they provide survey services, and we see, not knowing all the facilities that you have intimately yet, we're anticipating that there'll be need to do some sort of survey on some or many of them. So some of the examples of their modeling work are on the next slide. These are some medical projects that they have modeled, and we just wanted to make sure that you knew that they had a lot of experience. Another nice thing about Coast to Coast is that they have representatives or staff that are actually spread out throughout the country so that they can service all of your locations, and they do that very well, and we have other examples of work that we've done with them as a subcontractor to us. In addition to the modeling services, as I said, they also provide scanning services, and so they have done medical scanning of some pretty sophisticated and complex medical or healthcare facilities, and obviously using 3D laser scanning equipment. And they also use, if you will, a little bit more commonplace linear laser scanning measuring devices when they don't need a full 3D laser scan. So they're well versed in all different levels and all different needs for scanning and modeling services. So we have a pretty good bench there and good experience with these partners. And in addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we also have an extensive partner network when it comes to training capabilities in applications or solutions that we are not experts in, but we are experts in BIM implementation and BIM software and construction technologies and fabrication, which all surround what we think are your core needs. Okay. So now we just wanted to recap the overview of the 4 phases that you outlined in your RFQ, and just kind of make some comments on it to begin with. So if you could go ahead and just list all the 4 phases, that would be helpful. So in reviewing the schedule, as you presented it to us, we feel that it's pretty aggressive for the first phase. We are also confident that we can meet those needs, developing the BIM protocols, the content and guidelines, and even provide the training for your staff. We can do that. But we also see that there's a need to collect some information in order to know exactly what those creation guides, those BIM requirements need to be. And obviously it can be an evolutionary process, so we don't need to stagnate getting to modeling existing facilities, but at the same time we want to make sure that we're collecting information or modeling information, including it, that you need, and making sure that's incorporated to any kind of training program and any kind of models that we start modeling for you. So we do feel that, although that wasn't highlighted as a step under phase 1, we would even propose, even if it needed to be a short discovery, we would want to do that as soon as possible. Phase 2, we do feel that how you've broken the phases into then modeling the remaining models in this program. You mentioned that there was 160 buildings that you wanted to model and 15 million square feet. If that's more or less, obviously we would want to get more details on that. But modeling the core and shell of all the existing buildings first, I think, is a good first step. Then, if you will, maturing that information with more detailed architectural interiors and basic MEP information is a natural next step. And then doing the complete MEP for those models, once we define what complete MEP means, because it can mean different things to different people, but obviously working with you to define that when we do a discovery or during the process of doing the first 2 buildings, define exactly what that is. So we feel pretty good about how you've laid it out. I think we might want to, after we've reviewed it, the buildings themselves, just talk about maybe an order that we would do them, but overall the general 4-step process or 4-phase process sounds good to us. And just to kind of interject something before we move on to this next piece, we we want this to be more interactive, so certainly we can go through our presentation, but if you have any questions along the way, please by all means, interrupt us and we'll address them as we need to. But we're just trying to respond to the questions that you had in the agenda first. So if you would go ahead and... Yes?
We're good with that, John.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So one of the questions you had was regarding return on investment and the value that implementing a BIM process would have for you all. I think you already have some sense that it's going to do that. The very nature of building information modeling is that it is adding richer data that can provide you more information to make better decisions and to utilize for operations and maintenance and other facilities management related activities is a very powerful tool. It's a way of centralizing data, making it more, if you will, contextual to the overall building instead of having a lot of federated information that does not always stay updated or is easy to track or update. We do think that part of a discovery process, again, whether it's that initial discovery or as we're working with you to do the initial buildings and even do some initial training, is to define the key performance indicators that you want to track so that we can make sure that those are incorporated into any BIM requirements and that we can actually measure your own return on investment. We have had experience with some of our own clients where they have replied back to us after a few years of implementing BIM workflows and Revit as their primary BIM authoring tool. I just actually had a conversation with a client on Monday. It was unsolicited, and they have been so happy with their migration to BIM and Revit, and they say they have seen, and by comparing it to past projects of a similar nature, and this is unusual. I'm going to kind of qualify this right now, but this is very unusual for somebody to see a performance gain of 40%. I would say that a more typical one, and some that I've heard from some of our past clients who we are still doing services for, mostly to support new staff or retraining or advanced training after an implementation, is that they are seeing somewhere around a 10, maybe 15% return on investment, meaning they are seeing efficiencies of 10 to 15% on their projects using BIM workflows. So I think the range is probably more in a 10 to 20%. 10 to 15 is probably more typical. And I think there's other data out there that can support that. There's a case study for a couple of medical projects by Autodesk that support about a 9.2% return on investment after just doing their first pilot projects. So the next point that we're going to cover is going to be addressed by Michael Zeveld. He'll tell you a little bit about himself and then take it from there.
Great, thanks, John. As John mentioned, my name is Michael Zeveld, and I'm the Senior Project Manager with Applied Software. And I actually have a sort of personal connection with the Mayo Clinic. I actually grew up in Minnesota and worked in architecture up there for years and did several projects with some of the hospitals up there in the Children's Hospital in St. Paul, which is a kind of clover leaf-shaped hospital, and did several other things throughout the area. And but growing up in Hastings, which is about an hour up the road from Rochester, we were in that area and spent some time in there. But really, the personal connection piece is, I have a niece who lives up there, and at the time was 11 years old, and she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and is now cancer free and got through it. But the technology that helped to cure her was developed through the Mayo Clinic. So that's a personal tie-in for me, and very exciting, because in the end, all this stuff we're trying to accomplish or trying to do with these buildings helps people to do research or to do better at their work and help find these cures for the end result patient, but also in tracking this information and making these models is just making that environment better for those people. So kind of a personal tie-in, but that's what we're really doing this hopefully for, is for the people who are going to be the end recipients of the results that are in these buildings. But we're excited. I'm excited to help move forward your efforts with getting into BIM and how we can assist with that. And I thought we'd highlight some of the projects or some of the other organizations we worked with that are similar to yours. You're a large organization, multiple sites, And these are just some examples of folks that we've worked with, and they range from either creating BIM models for them, developing BIM execution plans, digital model data integration. We also were hired as owner representatives for BIM initiatives, 3D building scans, point clouds, asset tracking, general Revit training, and overall just business process improvements. So all these groups we helped in some form or fashion at different levels to make their lives better and to accomplish their specific goals. And we have the Mayo Clinic down in Jacksonville on there as well. We've done some software and have a relationship with them. So there's a lot of folks and many other folks that we didn't put on here, but I wanted to highlight a couple of key projects that we worked on. One is with the GSA, and this was to develop a BIM portal, this facilities management portal, which allowed them to track 140 buildings throughout the country, all of their properties, in the single web portal based off of these models and information and the data that was contained within them. So they could track and look at energy consumption, whether that's live specific data being fed into there or even historical data. And this was also tied into their O&M system. So that was sort of a downstream of what they could do with some of this modeling information, but kind of a nice highlight as far as a project. Another one we wanted to look at was Chick-fil-A, and which is quick serve type restaurants. And for them, we initiated a big picture vision planning for them, a 3 to 5 year plan, which really looked at their business processes, how they approached building their restaurants. And they also had their initiative to add 1,600 new stores throughout the next couple of years. So having that model access information when they're building the new construction was key, but also when they do renovations and refresh, they call them. They have a 3 and a 5 and a 7 year cycle where they change out different things in the building. But really, they wanted to also track that information, how many pieces of equipment and what were the serial numbers and data contained in that, and then be able to take this information out to the field with some of the mobile technologies. But their overall goal was to get into their building faster, more efficient, and quicker. So something like from 17 weeks down to 15 weeks, so they could do more business and be up and running. So that was a great story. We trained their folks, we did models for them, worked with their extended team, and then introduced this technology. The third one I wanted to just highlight is Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. And their initiative was to integrate technology into their buildings. This is for new construction and also renovations as well. And we started out kind of planning out the overall process, which entailed a BIM execution plan and developing these guidelines for not only the university to use, but for construction and architecture groups to come in and watch over. And we were also hired as an owner representative to track the progress during this construction to make sure these technologies were being put into the digital models, which would then be handed over to the facilities maintenance folks, because their big thing was, it takes maybe a year or two to build these buildings, but they maintain them for 50 years after that. So the information contained in them is super important to them. So it wasn't just creating 3D digital models. It was really looking at how can we have valuable information in there. So that extended out to the design teams, the architects, the engineers, and training them to make sure they were putting the right information into the models. So we were actually able to hand over this data-rich information to Georgia Tech, and along downstream their FM systems where they query and do work orders and different stuff like that. So just wanted to touch on that, and basically, having done this type of work and looking at this kind of stuff, we've developed these best practices, and I know that was a concern of y'all, is how will we implement this? How will we make this happen for you all? And this whole process in having dealt with these different organizations has helped us to develop and refine that overall process. And one of those is kind of the front end thinking of this task, right? Is having a workshop or a discovery is what we like to call it as well, and really looking at what are your needs, what is involved with the type of information you want to track and information you want to have, what kind of assets do you need to pull records on? Not just the 3D digital model, but what is an important specific piece of equipment? And then also, what type of implementation are we looking at? The level of detail. Are we really wanting to show every nut and bolt and every component and every doorknob, or are we looking at major systems, major HVAC systems, rooms, square footage, levels, that kind of stuff? And then, what's the plan to make that all happen? And this is all kind of the front-loading portion of this, and really seeing how we can assess the line in advance. You'll see this later on, of really making sure we're lining up your specific needs, kind of pre-engineering, building that into the process, that we are really making this an effective tool for you in modeling all your buildings, making sure it's consistent, getting the information that you need, and then making that actually happen, implementing that specific stuff, looking at all the different components. And we'll talk some more about the technology and some of the other pieces. But ultimately, that builds up to this roadmap. And that roadmap really determines and gets into, the models themselves, the specific content, developing the training guidelines for your folks so they can use the models, develop the models, over the life cycle of the project. This is a culmination, and I think we're, kind of looking more focused at developing some models, doing some training, but this is sort of the front loading, if you will, to get us to that point. So another way we approach this and look at this, and some of their questions, is this project as a whole. And we went through the exercise of taking your key phases in your project and breaking them down into specific tasks, specific milestones, and really addressing this kind of forward thinking of, if we take on this project, if we look at it, how are we going to staff this? What are the needs? And I apologize, that's sort of small, but this goes through, this isn't just a generic kind of schedule. We went through the actual exercise and really breaking it down to specific phases, what's involved, getting down into this work packets and work activities level for the actual task to say, these are the critical things we need to do. These are the components, these are the questions we need to get answered to move on to these other pieces. So just looking at how we approach this and when the timing of stuff, we wanted to dig into that and address this so we can be successful moving forward with this. And one of y'all's questions dealt with the owner, you as the owner. What are our responsibilities, and what kind of resources are we looking at to need to basically to support this whole BIM model and keeping them updated and current, if you will. And we're going to overall look at this. What technologies are in place? Are the computers adequate? Do you have the right software? And really making sure that those components are in place so you can be effective to maintain that. And a lot of this also comes down to what I say, a top-down sort of support, right? That the folks who are maintaining this or needing this information, they're in support of it, to have the folks get trained and be able to keep these models up to date and current. So that's something we want to address and look at to make sure that we're coming at this from the right angle. Also is a critical piece to this. I mentioned about people, the end recipients, but also the people who will be working on this specifically, and basically how they address or how they look at this information. So we want to also look at, from a front end standpoint, where are people at? Do they know the specific software? Do we need to get them up to speed on training? Are the information we're asking or that the Mayo Clinic wants to get out of the data is critical, and also making sure that those pieces are in place. And this is a overall part of this overall integration component that really prepares you for these changes going forward. And this graphic sort of shows that people and the data are putting the data in, and that moves into this kind of bigger core of pool of information where that information is being managed and watched and looked at, but that really becomes your business intelligence, that your buildings become smart. And how many of something do we have in there? How do we fix that? How do we maintain that? So knowing who's putting that information in, that they're trained, that they're comfortable with it, that they're up to speed, I think is a very critical component to this overall process. I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's going to address some of the other questions.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Petrucci. I've been with Applied Software now for just over 7 years. My background is actually in engineering, and I started out as a civil engineer, I did take some classes in school at the time, working with a very early version of CAD. I then worked out in construction, did a little surveying early in my career, but I really did have a passion for architecture. So when I moved to Georgia, I got a job with an architectural firm, and I was there for 13 years. And I know what it takes to help firms transition over from CAD to BIM. I know what the struggles are. I also want to mention, just before I transitioned over to an architectural firm, I worked for a company that we created as-built drawings, and then we linked them to FM systems. So we worked with the facilities management database in the early 90s. So I have a thorough understanding the importance of the data that the FM team is using. One thing I want to make sure is that, we're not looking to really replace systems. We're looking to enhance the systems. Data needs to be in specific locations. It does not need, not all data needs to be inside a Revit model. FM data needs to be in its location. Phone data needs to be in its location. But we need a way to kind of integrate the different systems together. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit here is the idea of the workflow, kind of the existing workflow for companies not using BIM. So this chart shows the different phases of working on a project, where we talk about planning, design, construction, and operation. And typically what happens between the different phases, there's a loss of information. And so from planning to design, the planning team, they're working on some conceptual models, and before you know it, they have an idea what they want to do, and then they hand it off to the design team. But there could be loss of information. So in the early days of BIM, we had a really good workflow going from planning to design and then kind of into construction, but getting into operations was somewhat lacking. However, Autodesk has developed tools in the last 3 years, almost 4 years now. They've developed a lot of tools on the construction side that have allowed us to collect the information during construction and then transition that over at the end of the project for commissioning and handover. We can go on to the next slide. So what I want to describe here is, all the information that we collect during each of the phases, we don't lose that information. It needs to get handed off or transferred over to the next phase. In this example, what you're looking at is once we get to construction, we can use things like QR codes or barcodes. In this example, you see a barcode, which we have barcodes linked to equipment and spaces and any object, if you will, that during the construction phase, I can scan a barcode and all the information related to that particular object is available to me right then and there. And the intent here is that we're constantly updating information through construction, that during commissioning and handover, we're able to transfer that information. So everything I'm showing you here applies for new construction, existing construction, renovation. So very easy for us to transfer data. Go on to the next slide. This video, I want to show this video here, and let me kind of set this up to kind of show you the idea of collecting information and then transferring it down the line of the project. In this particular video, what I'm going to show you is this young lady. She moves into a new apartment building. This could be a renovation project, but during the design phase, maybe some equipment was spec'd out, but during construction, it could have been switched. And then during handover, instead of handing over reams of drawings and notebooks of information that just kind of gets stored in a room, all that information is collected in the cloud, and then we can simply, with literally a push of a button, we can transfer that information over a particular service, which you're going to see here by Autodesk, called Building Ops. But the same would apply for most FM packages. So let's go ahead and start this video, and I'll kind of describe the workflow here. In this scenario, this young lady, she moves into her apartment, and the exhaust fan does not work. so she can open up an app on her iPhone. This could be a tenant or this could be a maintenance person. When they discover a problem, they could immediately fill out a ticket. That ticket gets created and it's pushed up to the cloud, and then the necessary people are notified. So this gentleman receives this ticket and will head over to her apartment to take a look at it. And you'll see that he removes the cover and there's a barcode for this piece of equipment. So scanning that barcode now will provide him all the information that was collected through design and through construction. So he could even bring up the model to see how this equipment is connected to the system. He could bring up information about that particular equipment. If he wants, he can bring up a manual to see maybe there's some repairs he can make on the spot. But right there, it's available to him. In this case, on a phone, it could be an iPad or a tablet PC. He can look at additional information or maybe who the installer was, and simply with his smartphone, click on a phone number, make a call, and address the equipment as far as needing it to get repaired. All right, so I'm going to hand this over to our next person, which is going to be Mike Massey.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Massey, and as far as my background, I do have an architectural background. I've got about 15 years experience working as an architect, doing everything from houses to hospitals. Been with Applied Software now coming up on 6 years. I was with a previous reseller for 5 years. I've got a total of a little bit over 10 years implementing technology and working with architects and engineers. And I guess my role, I know I've got an architectural background, but when I first came into this role, I was asked if I would be willing to learn the MEP products, and so I kind of slowly raised my hand and I said, okay, I'll do that. And I quickly became the MEP guy. So for the last 10 years, I've been teaching primarily the MEP products to engineers and subcontractors. So I've got a lot of experience coming from that industry. I actually wrote the Revit MEP training manual for Autodesk a couple of years ago, but I've got a lot of history there. So I want to talk to you about some of the technical review, some of the technical parts of this, and specifically addressing the question about your, I guess, the standards and creating BIM standards and using standards, different things like that. Standards are important. I think that we need to establish some BIM standards, whether it is your own standards or following a national standard like the Kobe system. I'm going to pause for a second. Something popped up on the computer there. If y'all could close whatever that is.
All right.
On there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, hang on, guys. We got to close it. There we go. But as far as using a standard, it's critical, and we want to partner with you to kind of develop what those standards are, to determine what information we need to put in the model. Whether we have financial objectives or strategic planning or leasing strategies or whatever it is, if we can implement that and put that into the process, then we can use that downstream and use it for everything that we need to use it for. So there's a lot of information there that we can use. Also, developing a BIM execution plan, I think, is critical as well. So as you're working with your consultants or your architects that may be helping you out with buildings, making sure they have a clear understanding of what their expectations are. We want to help you define that and make sure that does include the information that y'all are going to be needing to operate your buildings afterwards. And so we've done this with, like Michael Zeveld said at the beginning, with lots of different companies to help them establish this. And so it's a partnership with you to kind of help you develop this together so that we do include the information that you need in there. So we can include all this throughout the entire process. All right, let's go to the next slide. As far as information in the model, I think it's critical, again, to know what information we need. So as we start developing content, whether it is a family of a piece of medical equipment or whatever it is, if we want to implement something like Kobe standards or something like that, if we can input that information into the content initially, it's going to be there so that we can use it downstream. So pinpointing that information that we need to pull out later on, and then we can extract it out in other programs with mobile devices or whatever we want to do to get that information in our hands, later on in the process. So with that, I think I'm going to come back and do a little bit more, but I think we're going to turn it over to John next. If I'm fully, yes.
Thank you, Mike. I think one of the other concerns or one of the questions you brought up was how to address working on multiple projects or multiple projects happening on the same floor or the same facility at the same time. The good thing is that many of us have some expertise and some experience working with clients, working on projects where we've had that same demand. So we have addressed that in the past, and I'm actually going to use kind of not a parallel industry, but a parallel process as kind of a way of explaining it and how we would structure some of this. The slide that's in front of you is really just an example of how we would actually document a workflow so people know who is sourcing what data, how it is being organized, if there are multiple models involved for a facility so that it can go under a renovation and an upgrade or capital improvement and have multiple projects going on at the same time, how you would break up that information so that people could execute those projects at the same time. A couple of examples that I can bring to bear on my own, and I know that Mark Petrucci and Michael Zeveld and Matt Dillon and Mike Massey and all of us on our technical team have different experiences that speak to this. But one, more importantly with me, is tenant improvement work. So tenant improvement work, for anybody who has an architectural background and maybe have worked in corporate interiors or interior design, is the need to be able to work on multiple tenants on the same floor at the same time. So there's some lessons that we've learned from that, and also multi-family type of applications like assisted living, independent living, and even hospitality work, which is a little bit different. But they all involve having unitized kind of approaches where we would obviously have to either break up portions of the building into more subsets, and in some cases more models to separate the work so that they can be worked on in parallel, and then as that information updates, you reintegrate it back into a master model. So the concept is really either managing it through work sets, a combination of phases, and or different models. It really depends on what those particular scenarios are, and there might be 2 or 3 workflows to address each unique scenario. Because I am just thinking through it before the meeting, as we were leading up to this presentation, I could think of several scenarios that would require a slightly different approach, but we could document them, train on them, and make sure that people knew how to work with them. And training would extend not only to your own staff, but we also see a need to potentially train your ecosystem, those who are working with you on your projects to provide or update BIM data or new projects. So we can go to the next slide. So equally important, and Mike kind of touched on this already, and it ties into the standards, is this workflow of maturation. We've already talked about the standards to define how we want people to provide information and how to create it and why. It's helpful to make sure that people know why they're doing something. That way they understand the importance of following a guideline. It's not just there to make their lives difficult, it's there to ultimately make their lives easier. So in this case, it's about what data gets input. We would collect that early on in the discovery workshop, in the process of learning your workflows and making sure that we capture and identify the specific pieces of data, where they go, and who is the authoritative body for it. Some of that's going to come from the designer. Some of that's going to come from you operating the facility. Some of that may come from your operations and maintenance group. Some of that may even come from a manufacturer or subcontractor during construction or installation. So there are different sources. You want to make sure that those people are putting in the information and that they know that they're the source for it. So we have worked specifically in a Georgia Tech workflow using COBE as a collection system for taking data that has been collected either in the field and or in the design models, outputting it to a more generally accepted industry standard format like COBE, if needed, and then transporting that into an O&M system. In this case, we have an example where we've done it with AIM. We've also done it with Archibus. So we've worked with different FM systems. We do believe that the Four Rivers TMS has similar capabilities, so we're pretty sure we can integrate with it. Ideally, and this is kind of an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about our development capabilities, is although COBE is a standard by which we can collect and share data, ultimately we would like to integrate. So we're actually pulling in a more automated fashion data from different systems, whether it's a Revit model or whether it's BIM 360 field, and integrating that into your operations and maintenance and even facility managed program, maybe even your WARS or even your any other ERP or SAP system. We have a team of developers that not only develop tools for Revit, but they also develop solve the integrations between different databases. So part of the standards is also defining responsibility. So this slide is really just showing a tool that we would use as part of the process to say, all right, we talked about who is modeling what, and this usually comes up as part of that BIM execution plan that we've already mentioned. It is one of those standards, one of those guidelines that we would want to put in place with you to help identify who is the responsible party and who is ultimately going to be the one filling in the data. And so this doesn't show the entire document, but those columns represent different disciplines, if you will, like the architect, MEP, subcontractor, contractor, could even be the owner, and who ultimately is responsible for certain pieces of information and content. So Mike is going to take over again and talk a little bit about some infrastructure needs.
Sure. As far as infrastructure, hardware requirements, things like that, let me just start off by saying this. For years, it seemed like every time a new release of a CAD product came out, we would have to upgrade our hardware. You know, they have new standards out there in which we would have to upgrade. I think the technology is finally caught up with the software, where the technology, you know, we use our hard drives now. We don't have to worry about hard drive space at all anymore because our hard drives are so big. But I think now the technology is there where the software is not driving the technology. The technology can handle the software. But we will ensure and make sure that your hardware, your technology that you have is up to speed as far as making sure it meets the current standards that's required to do any of these programs out there. These are big models that we're talking about, big files that we're talking about. So we certainly want to make sure that we have the correct hardware so that we're not sitting there waiting all day and processing it. But we will do some, I guess, some discovery to see what you currently have and make any recommendations that we need to ensure that you can work efficiently. And through that, the picture on the screen, this little spider web graph up there, this is a graph that we use to kind of determine where your needs are, but also to determine where you're headed there. So if you look at the spider web there, the dark gray is representing where you may be today, and the lighter gray is representing where we may be in the future. So we want to match those goals up so that, you know, if we need to increase it and bump up hardware or bump up personnel or whatever it is, we can address those areas so that we can have a roadmap to the future as far as making sure that we're headed in the right direction. All that's done through a discovery period. We can discover what you have and where we're headed in the future. And the second part of this question that I wanted to respond to is the possibility, or what are we going to recommend to do when we're working with multiple, I guess, locations working on the same project, where we have the Jacksonville office or wherever it is, the Phoenix office, trying to work together on the same project. How can we share that information back and forth across the country? Autodesk has come up with several different lines of products to assist us with this. They're all, I guess, web-based technology where we can share information back and forth, and we would propose using this. One of them is called Collaboration for Revit. That will allow us to have multiple authors working on the model simultaneously over the internet. You know, speed is, you think speed would be the issue, but they've kind of got this worked out where they've got accelerators built in, and it's pretty quick. And the beauty of this is that it requires no hardware setup, no IT setup. Basically, it's a username and password. We set it up, and then your model kind of resides out on the cloud that everybody can kind of work off of. So it's real easy to set up and easy to get going. We've got lots and lots of customers that are using it that absolutely love it. And so you may have heard of other technologies that are out there previously to kind of set this up so that we can work concurrently in different locations. All that required IT setup, where we had to kind of build a portal or a pipeline connecting those places first, and then we could work together. This doesn't require any of that, so it's very efficient, and I think the cost savings is theirs too, as far as working, having people working on it simultaneously. Also with that comes the ability to have a web portal that we can share non-Revit stuff. So we have other types of files out there, whether it's Word files or PDFs or any kind of files like that. We can share that information out there and have a wiki page out there so everybody has the most current version of that, so we can kind of track that and make sure that everybody's working on the correct information. So there's lots of technologies out there that we're going to take advantage of to kind of push you into this digital age, I guess, so that we can share this information back and forth with each other. And I think all this, let me just kind of wrap up. I think we've touched on training here and there, but I think a lot of this is training as far as making sure your people are up to speed in this technology. You know, I'm in this technology business every day, and if I don't keep up with it, I'm out of date. And then I think same thing for your employees. If they're not keeping up with it, you know, they're going to be behind time. So we want to make sure that we find out where they're at today and find out where we want to be, and make sure we develop a plan to get them to where we want them to get, how we get them there. So I think that's critical. So whatever technology we introduce, we were going to for sure introduce some type of training with that to make sure that we're implementing it correctly and not just selling you a piece of software. Okay, next slide.
So we didn't kind of stage that, but so the intent of what we wanted to do today was first and foremost introduce you to the core team that would be on the call, would be working on the project, covering various responsibilities, basically following your agenda, and also address some of the questions and concerns that you had as part of this project. We have talked about a discovery, what we think is an important part of the process, and part of that also addresses the training needs. We want to make sure two things happen with the training, kind of tailing on to what Mike said, is we want to make sure that we know what we're modeling and what information you need so that you can use it for operations and maintenance, so that we can make good recommendations on how we develop your standards, your guidelines, and you know, make sure we collect the right information both design-wise, model-wise, and from the field, so that it's useful throughout the life cycle of the project, because we realize that ultimately the operation of your facility is one of the most important outcomes of this effort. The modeling obviously is a big component of this too. We have a lot of hands-on experience doing modeling. We just like to use partners to assist us with that so that we can apply our expertise with consulting to solving the problem, working with you on implementing the solution, as well as overseeing the modeling itself. So we do a lot of modeling services in terms of defining modeling processes, helping people with model content, family content for Revit, and also ensuring that the quality of the models are aligning with the requirements that you have set in place. So we not only have done modeling, we just prefer not to do it ourselves so that we can actually do the consultative part. And then again, to reiterate on the development piece, we see a huge opportunity here to integrate systems. The one thing we see as very important is trying to single source data. You want to make sure that there is not duplicate data out there that can conflict with each other and create errors. So as much as possible, if one system has information about any particular piece of the facility, you want to make sure that it's feeding into another system or model to populate it with that information, so that we're not somebody's trying to transfer it or copy and paste it, but rather making sure that the one place is feeding all the other locations that need it. That is the way to create harmonious BIM solution where the BIM models hold some of the information and pretty much most of the graphic content, but wherever other information about the facility is tied together into the systems where you're accessing it, tracking it, and leveraging it for maintenance purposes. So we expect that you might have some questions for us. If we had more time, we would probably do individual presentations on a lot of the examples that we touched on. We have a couple of questions of our own, but right now I just want to see if you have any questions for us.
You have to leave, so
sure. This is Tim Siegfried in Rochester. You had, at the beginning of your presentation, you had shown a slide there with the multiple firms and companies that you've done business with. And my question is, which one of those firms, or how many of those firms, were kind of at the same stage Mayo is at right now? And you know, which of the, and you mentioned Georgia Tech and a couple others, are they the same size and complexity as what you're seeing here in Rochester, Florida, and Arizona? So that's my question in a nutshell. But in all reality, you know, I want to make sure that you know, you've shown us the process, but I want to make sure that you've done it.
Mm-hmm.
In a nutshell.
Sure, no, and I think it'll probably be a little bit of a tag team answering that. I'd say one of the projects that kind of comes close to that in terms, it's not healthcare specific, but it is complex, and it is a campus-based solution, is Georgia Tech. So now that was a little bit more of a step-based process, but them being, if you will, a state institution, have different processes and funding that we have to go through to, you know, kind of spread out the investment, if you will. But basically we work with them to, first of all, supplement what they call their yellow book, which is their overall production and documentation guidelines that all their subcontractors have to abide by, with a BIM requirements section, which has actually been, I believe, pulled out and made its own separate document. That was then married up with training for their staff, and also published so that any future capital projects, I believe over $3 million. So they weren't doing it with any of the renovation and retrofit work to begin with. They wanted to start with capital projects where they felt that they had a little bit more budget and fee to implement this without it being a hardship on any of their constituents. But they went ahead and started doing that on new projects on the campus. The goal is to actually go back and model all the facilities ultimately, but they wanted to start with facilities that were in design and about to go into operation. So an early project used the BIM implementation standards. Some of our clients were actually the consultants on that project. We got feedback from them, and we've actually made some updates to those BIM requirements. One of the projects that Michael Zeveld kind of indicated was a sophisticated building called the Engineered Bioscience Building 1, where we were the owner's rep, and we were reviewing the models at various stages to make sure that they were conforming and that they were collecting data. They also used the BIM, the Autodesk BIM 360 field to collect data through commissioning in order to populate more of the information that was needed and to be collected. And we used COBE as a method because at that time they didn't want to invest in developing a direct integration between field and or Revit and their O&M system, which was AIM, AssetWorks AIM. So we used COBE and verified that workflow worked. We also found, you know, the pain points in that process and fixed them along the way. And Michael, you might be able to describe that. But anyways, that's kind of, they don't have multiple campuses, but they do have a campus with well over 100 buildings, and we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg with or beyond the proof of concept to actually implementing it with them?
Yeah, Tim, that's a great question. And to expand on what John was saying, and just for a visual for you, this up on the screen is the BIM model from EBB1, and it being a science and a laboratory type building, there's a lot of systems, a lot of things going on inside of it. So the coordination of that, and then also what was being put into what level, was of vast and huge concern. But to touch on even some of the other folks, that we had on our earlier slide, they were all at the beginning of the process. They had maybe dabbled in Revit and creating some BIM models, but weren't sophisticated and really at a point saying, we don't know where to go next. And that's where we came into play and helped them along that journey. And like I said, some of the things we discussed with a discovery and learning what they needed and what was important to them was defining what that model was going to look like in the end, and so they could use it downstream. So they were all at the beginning. We did several training with folks, establishing those standards, and really help them to be where they want to be, and help them to get to that next level. And like Georgia Tech with the EBB1 and some of these other projects, they're now at a sophisticated level, ready to integrate more components with that.
And Autotrader.com doesn't have the same, if you will, volume of facilities that you have, but early on, so we kind of cut our teeth many years ago doing modeling work, actually surveying existing facilities, using at the time pretty state-of-the-art technology to laser measure and automatically put into AutoCAD that we then converted into Revit models. And we were doing that for 5 facilities just for Autotrader, which is part of Cox Communications, or owned by Cox Communications, or Cox Enterprises. That process, and that was to replace a CorelDRAW and Excel spreadsheet facilities management process that they had. And these people had churn like nobody I've ever heard of. They had 1,000 people, and they churned 1,500 a year. So they were churning more than the number of people that they had, meaning moving them around within their facility. So they were very active. The idea was that ultimately they were going to move into another facility. So we ended up modeling a new facility, which was in an existing building for them, and then they ultimately implemented FM Systems as their facility management tool. So not as broad a scope, but similar in nature, where we had to do modeling, come up with the requirements, and also the processes for FM.
Okay, thank you.
This is Gary in Rochester, and I have a question that piggybacks off of Tim's, and it's more about with Georgia Tech, maybe specifically, did they, prior to you helping them, did they have any BIM or Revit capabilities, or maybe even AutoCAD? Did they harvest information and put it into some sort of CMMS software program prior to you helping them?
No, they were strictly, they did have a design and construction department. They do have an operations and maintenance department. They really did not communicate well. They had traditional handover of, again, what I think Michael or somebody referred to as the rolls of documents and the binders of cut sheets and information that had to manually be put in. So they were really looking at bypassing even where somebody might give you spreadsheets with data filled in, where they'd still have to figure out how to bring it into their O&M system and really collect it more live as the design is being done and as the construction is being done in the field, so that it was more of a seamless collection of data. Did you want to add on to that, Michael?
Yeah, I was going to add that, Georgia Tech was, in the AutoCAD world, and weren't really even extracting any information from that. And our first engagement with them was to develop the BIM execution plan, and basically to define those guidelines, which turned out to be that yellow book that John was mentioning. But that was really the source guide for anybody creating any type of documentation for Georgia Tech, whether it's the architects, engineers, or even the model, or drawing and modeling internally as well. And from that, it started to launch this initiative to say, well, we want everything in BIM. We want new buildings, everything over a certain dollar amount, and then starting to include the entire campus so they could track all that stuff. So I think it started kind of at a slower pace and then kind of grew to a larger capacity where, you know, they wanted all their information in there as well.
Are they at the point now then that they can track and maintain a facility database in Revit or some other graphical software?
Yeah, so what's exciting about that particular project is we were entering Revit information into the model during design while they were, you know, documenting the building, and some of those were considered placeholders. So when they moved into the field, they used some of the mobile devices that we touched on to enter additional information, barcoding items as they were being installed, and then that was actually round trip back into Revit as a complete, you know, source of information, which we then used Kobe format to bring into their AssetWorks, their FM software, and to do a successful handshake where now they have that information and can track it, you know, accurately. But it all came from the source of Revit. So that was a successful process, which we were very excited about.
Yeah, but I think the outcome of that was we would recommend, I think that was something that they wanted to achieve, is to see if they could have everything put back in the model.
Mm-hmm.
Our recommendation was really that, you know, the model does contain some information initially, the design information, which is, you know, starts the process, starts the tracking of the object data, and gets embellished or added to as it goes through construction, and certainly you want to keep it alive. And so we wanted to make sure that we could show that we could populate that data back into the model, and the reason for that was so that if they need to come back and do a major renovation or capital improvement on that project, they have a model that can have all the current data already in it, so they're not having to repopulate it. That was why they did that. I just want to make sure you knew the reason for it.
Jerry Lorth here. I got a question regarding models in general. We have in this environment here what we call a design intent model, and we know that general contractors and mechanical and electrical are actually doing their own models. Any experience with blending those models together to get as-built type condition?
Yeah, you want to talk about that, kind of the same project? Or?
Yeah, this is Mark Churchy. I'll touch on that a little bit. Contractors are definitely realizing the need to bring on staff that not only familiar with construction but also with Revit and building models, because they do realize the importance of building construction models. So it's not uncommon for them to recreate the models. However, you know, there are some BIM 360 services. There's a product called Glue. It's a great coordination tool. It allows you to model and place the model in the cloud and do coordination in the cloud that as the design model actually gets more towards construction, you know, we can make that model or make it closer to a construction grade model. If they need a higher level, they'll model it themselves, but it's not normally a complaint. They just kind of accept it. I worked with architects for many years, you know, and their job is to create this design. Their job isn't always to know how all the pieces and parts are going to fit together. If that's in the model, great, but it's not uncommon for contractors to do that.
And I'll add to that, Mark, as far as working with the main trades out there, as far as structural and MEP trades out there, they're creating models. I mean, whether it's Revit or not, they're creating some form of models and taking that information and blending it back into the model with actual fabricated stuff. So the stuff that they're actually installing sometimes is different than the design intent model. So merging that information together, we've got a lot of experience working with subcontractors as far as developing that content so that it can be merged back into the construction model.
Model where the sheet metal contract obviously design intent.
It is, yes.
And we're after the final product. We want a model of what's
correct.
there.
Correct.
A lot of times it just falls off the radar. In other words, it doesn't happen. We end up with a design intent model 90% of the time.
It's not accurate.
Yes. and we want the other model. So within that framework, the content that's being developed, is there any control, if you will, or any times that you work with the contractor themselves so that the content matches whatever we choose it to be?
As far as, I guess, policing that, make sure it's being done.
Yeah. How does that work?
Mark, do you have any, you want to respond to that as far as policing the, I guess, the contractor ensure that they're putting the information in there that's required?
Or content development itself?
I guess that,
I can address it.
yes.
So this is Matt Dillon. I've been kind of quiet. Wasn't sure I was going to be able to be in the meeting, but part of that is having a well-developed BIM execution plan, and I'm sorry, can you hear me okay? Part of that is having a well-developed BIM execution plan and documented BIM requirements to specify specific deliverables for every phase of a project and who's responsible for those, and you would specify the as-built model and who would put that together. Usually it's the contractor. You need some way of policing it, but you can do that with model review, just visual verification, but I think it's critical to have it documented as to when it's done and who does it. And if it's not documented, then it's kind of hard to police.
And we have ways of querying the data to visually see that the items that have been identified for containing certain data, because you don't necessarily track everything, but the things you do need to track visually, like you said, have the data in them.
Right.
The accuracy of the data is still going to be dependent on people putting the data in. And sometimes that's scanning data, sometimes that's taking pictures, it could be a variety of ways, but sometimes it requires entry in that, there's always going to be people involved at some point. But verifying it's there is one thing, verifying it's accurate is another thing.
And another critical component of that is also specifying, kind of piggybacking on what John just said, is making sure that you're specifying what level of development you want in that as-built model. So there's various documented levels of development for different systems, and you need to specify that as part of the deliverable quality.
Yeah, and I think something that, we kind of all understand the benefits of BIM, but we kind of all assume that BIM can solve a lot of problems that really are more, it's the people. And we got to get, there's actually more collaboration in this entire workflow than before we had BIM. So that's really important, and the BIM execution plan is the starting point. That sets the standard that everybody must follow. But it's real important that there's a lot of communication, collaboration that goes on during the entire process, from planning all the way through handover.
And a typical BIM execution plan will actually indicate frequency of coordination meetings, who should be there, how they should be conducted.
It really is leading more towards an IPD type of relationship between the various constituents on a project. It really is demanding a higher level of collaboration.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Brian in Rochester. You touched on it a little bit in your consultants that you team up with on scanning. So obviously you're familiar with the scanning of existing buildings. Can you touch what other methods you've used and in your experiences, because we have a lot of square feet that is drawn in AutoCAD. It might not be very accurate. We've done a pretty good assessment on what buildings we feel is semi-accurate to all the way from you can't trust it level, because it's been built, it's been there for 100 years. We scanned it in off an old blue line drawing, etc. But then we also have buildings that have been constructed in the last 5 years that we got pretty accurate information. What's your guys' approach on trying to tackle something like this to give us something that we can use and not something that we go, well, that's not accurate?
Yeah, this is Mark Petrucci. I can tell you, I worked on the Auto Trader project with John, and what we did at that time, and this is going back to 2008, if I remember correctly, maybe 9. And at that time, we had a handheld laser that it was given to me, and I was told, hey, make this work with Revit. And at the time, we couldn't do that, but we were able to integrate it with CAD. And so literally, we were able to walk into AutoTrader and start measuring with this laser, and it would actually draw walls and place doors and windows. And so at the end of the day, an 8-hour day, you know, 25,000 square feet of space is done, and they wanted their entire building done. And so we created this CAD file, which we then brought into Revit and generated a 3D model. So that still is a possibility, but it's very common now, you know, for firms to do 3D laser scanning, because it is not that expensive, and it grabs so much information that creating a as-built model using point cloud data, you can actually have part of your model converted, or part of the scans converted to a model. It doesn't have to be everything at once, but that's something that you would meet with the scanning company, and we usually partner with the company to do that. And you meet with them and discuss, hey, what are your needs, and creating your model, what is the level of detail for your model. There was a company up in Tennessee called Unum, an insurance company, and they wanted all the piping above the ceiling scanned. And so they scanned piping and HVAC ductwork during the off hours, and they created a Revit model, a as-built Revit model of their plenum space.
And we have tools that help expedite modeling of point cloud data. Yep. And we've also done many projects that involve point cloud data for part of, you know, historic preservation, for several projects up in the DC area too. The other thing I was going to mention is that same workflow that we used on AutoTrader, the tools have been updated to the point now where they work directly into a Revit model too. So the point clouds can be used for verification and aligning the model data with the existing data, so it's much more accurate. We can, you know, there's different levels, I guess, of methods for doing it. It's just which one is the best one for that particular building and the data that you have to begin with. And certainly if you've got drawings, we would probably start with those, but knowing that through you identifying for us or us going out and doing spot checks, we would, you know, recommend scanning any that are obviously in need of verification.
Yeah, Brian, this is Michael Zeveld. You know, when putting the preliminary schedule together, I was anticipating this being the case and situation, so I was prioritizing the potential buildings based off the level of information that you had for them, knowing that you'd have some blueprint drawings, AutoCAD drawings, maybe something in Revit, and then other ones being, you know, totally needing to be scanned or a combination thereof. So I was looking at an initial priority list of some immediate need buildings and then a high, medium, low approach to that, so we could be concurrently working on the buildings that have good data for them, and then having teams going out in field verifying and then scanning that, and then a combination thereof. So we would want to work with you all to define what those buildings are, what those locations are, and to really, you know, expedite the process.
Yeah, and something else that I wanted to mention, you know, there's another partner we work with called ClearEdge. They have the ability where it'll recognize the scanned data and automatically replace it with model data inside of Revit. Used a lot with MEP and structural content. When it comes to bringing in the scan data, if you have CAD files or if you already have Revit models, you can overlay that onto your current model and start shifting walls if necessary. And that's actually something that we did here in our training room. When we first got a scanner, we scanned it. It was already modeled in Revit. I'm not sure who modeled it, but it was not, it was off.
It wasn't me.
So it was off. But
you're looking at me like I modeled it.
Yeah. So overlaying that, so I quickly shifted some walls for that particular room, and we got our training room, which actually has 3 curved walls in there and 1 wall that's at a funny angle. But we have that room that is completely accurate and matches our point cloud.
How about the rest of the building now? Is that all wrong because of that's right?
Yes.
Well, you guys said you had some questions for us. Well,
yeah, we're taking a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think one of them was, yeah, so I did have a couple of initial questions. Certainly, you know, we anticipate being your choice moving forward with this BIM initiative. So we are kind of curious when you're going to make a decision. And also, I don't know if you can tell us that now, but another question I had was, we really want to learn more about you and your workflows and your team to kind of start the process. So we would want to know when you'd be available to start doing the discovery. And we come to you and obviously involve people remotely from your other locations as we can. We've done it both ways. We always kind of start this off whenever we do work with our clients, but we're just excited for the opportunity and kind of anticipate getting started with you. So can you share any of that information with us, or?
Well, the answer to the first question, when do we hope to make a decision, all I can tell you is our group is meeting tomorrow, and obviously there's a lot of variables depending on comfort, confidence. Are we all on the same page? Can we make that decision? But I'd say as early as tomorrow we could be leaning toward a decision. Certainly can't promise to that. A lot of discussions to take place, but that's where we're at. Our meeting is tomorrow to discuss this, and we'll be able to kind of communicate where we're going from there, if that decision takes any other effort or evaluation. So obviously that'll be based on where everybody is. If we're all on the same page, that'll make that much easier. As far as the question, and it kind of ties to one of the questions we had in our proposal, tell me a little bit when you talk about this introductory fact finding. What do you typically see? Is that a half a day knowing the complexity that we're dealing with here? What do you typically see? What would your recommendation be as far as resources? So is that this entire group sitting at the table for 2 days straight, for a week straight, or 3 people sitting at the table? I mean, what do you typically see that takes to really learn enough about us to start this process?
Yeah, this is Michael Zeveld. Typically, we like to set aside 2 days, and that may seem like a lot, but we break it apart in hopefully different groups, and that takes a little bit of coordination on y'all's part. So in meeting with the group for maybe an hour or two or half the day, depending on what the group is involved with, and really learning your process, learning how they deal with the data, or what are some of their needs for a data, and also partially explaining the process of what they could actually pull from that. So it goes from different groups, from FM to the folks who are updating the plans, to even the folks who are running out to maintenance of the building. So a lot of different potential players in there, and that can be as wide or narrow as you feel fit. But usually that 2 days, we're able to really ascertain good information about your process and your workflow, and then we take those findings, put them into some reports that can really document where you're at and how we can see to help develop the initial work to start on this.
So we would typically put together an agenda. We don't want to take up any one person's for too long, and we know that your time is valuable, and so we would schedule it out and make sure that we've accounted for everybody and schedule a time when people are available. And again, for those who are remote, we would probably focus on coming to Rochester, just being the biggest location, and assuming that would be where you'd want to meet, but certainly tie people in who are from other campuses to ensure that we're collecting their information too.
Just curious, do you have a draft agenda specific to those 2 days? Or I couldn't see your schedule. Is that part of what's in there? The only reason I ask is, as we start to talk about, to your question, when can we meet and when can we do that, I think it would help to understand somewhat of a guide to what you're suggesting, just as we have our conversations tomorrow even. And I think one of the challenges you'll see with us, one of the true keys to success is we do have a lot of differences right now between our 3 campuses, but the key to success is coming up with strategies, I guess, that work for all of us, or understand the differences and why they don't work for all of us. I think that's simply said more difficult to take on. But
Obviously, we're trying. Our goal is to move to an enterprise environment where we're doing things the same, but we also have to make value-based decisions and do what's best locally as well. So that adds a little bit of complexity, but I think something we know is a challenge and we're ready to take on.
Yeah, and to answer your question, we can send you an agenda. We have basically an outlined agenda that we typically use for this kind of an engagement, and we can certainly send that to you after the meeting. I had just kind of talked about that because that is part of our standard process, but I didn't have it ready as a slide to kind of throw up on the screen. Sorry about that.
Do you have a cookie cutter BIM implementation plan?
It's funny, we're getting a bunch of funny faces around the table. We get a lot of people who ask that. And
if anything, it's a framework outline of key elements and items that we would want to address. But as far as the body and the true content, not necessarily, because we develop that based on some of this discovery and the uniqueness to your organization that, we didn't want to just recycle type of stuff. But as far as a format and layout and what the information, the specific headings are, that's about as much as a template that we really have.
Yeah, this is Matt Dillon. I've done a few of these, and no two of them are ever alike because they all start in a different place and they all want to go to a slightly different place. So it's really hard to have kind of a boilerplate type of a BIM implementation plan for that.
Let me just ask the question in reverse. Obviously, we're a long way. Haven't even had any time to digest, the information that we've received today or in other presentations. But if I spin that question back to you, when would you be ready? So if we met tomorrow and we made a decision, when would you be ready to sit down and start this process?
Potentially as early as later this month, certainly early September. It just depends on who I've got available. I would want to send probably somebody from Mark's team and somebody from my team together to run that discovery.
Okay, and we understand the challenge that we put when we put that schedule in front of you, so we understand that time being of the essence, and that's why I asked that question. I think we would likely, again, be right in that timeline. We know we need to move as quickly as possible, and we wouldn't want to be the holdup in supporting that, so that'll help us with our discussions tomorrow.
Oh, and part of the reason I asked the question too is because we get busy, and I want to make sure that we can reserve the time that we need with you.
Respect that. Absolutely respect that.
Okay. And this is Mark in Rochester. Pending a decision being made on anything, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, is there any upfront information that we could send you prior to our discovery meeting that might speed things along?
Oh, absolutely. We generally collect, different things. Certainly, we would want to know what, if any, standards you have in any place. What, if any, examples you can share of us of how you're doing. Any workflow diagrams, anything like that. We would want to collect so we can start to review it and actually develop some of the questions before we get to the discovery. Sometimes we'll also models, if there are any models that you already have, so we can see the state of models that you're currently using and have developed, so we have an idea what you're already doing. And it was just on the tip of my tongue too, and I just forgot what it was.
The key people we'd be needing to talk to.
Yeah, we would certainly want to know the people that we would need to meet with and start to understand their roles and responsibilities. Or charts, yeah, all that stuff.
We certainly would sit down and talk about all of those needs and assign some resources to help support you to understand, because again, that question's different for each of our 3 sites. We each have a little different level of model in Florida versus what we're doing here in Rochester. We'd certainly want to get you educated as possible in advance of that meeting, so the discovery isn't starting with where are you today. We can give you any of that background that would be of value.
Yeah, I remembered what was on the tip of my tongue too. A lot of times we'll do an initial survey to collect certain information from the people who are going to be participating in the discovery, just to get some background on, who they are, so we can collect some of that ourselves, but generally we'll use that as a tool for collecting information also.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other questions from our other two sites?
They can't speak.
Okay.
What's that? Florida's not, but they were going to send me anything that they had, and they haven't.
Anna, did you have anything?
No, I think everything was answered. Right.
Great.
On
well, then I'll wrap up. Thank you all for your time and preparation, and for being here locally. Certainly appreciate that effort, and we will, after our meeting tomorrow, at least give you an update on timeline. If we are ready to make a decision, we'll let you know that, or if we need a week because we need a week, we'll let you know that as well.
All right.
Hey guys,
well,
tell Brian the copy of the presentation we just did, so he has for his reference.
Sure. We don't charge too much for that. Okay, good. There was a laugh after that. I was hoping for that. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, you can tell.
Awesome. Well, we'll let you go. Thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.